Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma daf kavav. I will say it's one of my favorite dafim, certainly the second half of the daf. The first half, which I will say is a bit of a mix of all sorts of random suggestions about kavachomers, and perhaps it's a bit of a thorn in the side of Rabbi Tarfon about his whole thing was based on this kavachomer, and the Gemara wants to kind of say how ridiculous kavachomers can be. And we're going to have a set of 5 kavachomers that we're going to try to suggest why it seems that, right, kavachomer, it's almost a way of saying kavachomers are ridiculous, but what they're doing is they're doing it in the format like this. They're going to suggest 5 suggestions that we know. We've already been learning Bava Kamma for 24 dapim of it. We know already that these things are not true. And yet they're going to suggest, well, you could prove them from a kavachomer. In the end, they're going to say, well, why not? Why doesn't this kavachomer work? Because there's a special pasuk to say so. So in a sense, it could be viewed as just, you could have a kavachomer, but there's a pasuk to reject it. But it seems to me like they're a little bit mocking the whole, again, not that a kavachomer isn't it's obviously a very legitimate way of darshaning, but it's a bit dangerous, maybe you want to say. So we're going to start at the bottom of Kaf Hamud Bet, 3 lines from the bottom. First suggestion. So I said there's going to be 5, so we'll follow all 5. Shen regel chayav b'reshut harabim mikavachomer. Maybe shen and regel damages should be liable in the public domain, which we already learned they're not, but maybe they should be, because you could say the following: Ma keren shebereshut hanizak eno mishalem al chatzi nezek. Keren is obviously more lenient because in the domain of the person who you damaged, if you're there, and your ox damages, right? Your ox goes into someone else's territory. They only have to pay half damages, right? If they're not a shor muad. So shen, and yet bereshut harabim chayevet, and yet in the public domain they're liable the same half damages. To which they say, and therefore you could say the following: shen v'regel, which is obviously more strict because shebereshut hanizak mishalem nezek shalem. If you go into someone's territory and the animal goes in and eats your food, right, or anything like that, tramples, they're already liable full damages. So that means it's more strict than the laws of keren. So since keren in the reshut hayachid is half damages, you would say enodin shebereshut harabim chayav. So all the more so, shen and keren should be liable in the public domain. Which they say, why not? Because the pasuk says it. Ubi'er b'stei acher. Remember, that was the pasuk that said, if you go and eat in someone else's field. So therefore, it's only in someone else's field, the lo bereshut harabim. So the Torah makes it clear, don't think that. Now the Gemara has a bit of a question on this, though. Midi kule kamrin, and I wasn't trying to say from this kavachomer, it's whoever's speaking, that I meant full damages, which is what the pasuk will be ever stay acher is talking about. You have to pay full damages. Palga kamrina, what I meant is at least, fine, they're not going to be liable full damages in the public domain, but make them like keren, half damages. To which they say, there's a different pasuk which says, Amarkra bechatzu et kaspo. When it talks about half damages by keren, it says, you split the value of, right, I'll actually read the whole pasuk because we're going to darshan both parts of it. Okay, if one person's ox gores the other, we're in Shmo Kaf Aleph pasuk lamed hey, 21:35, and he dies. They take the live one, they sell it, v'chatzu et kaspo, and they split the money, meaning you only have to pay half the value of your animal. But gam et hamet yachatzun. You also, though, get to share in the value of the nevela. This is a way of saying, if you remember, if Ruth's ox kills Naomi's ox, so Naomi's ox is still worth something, and therefore the value that Ruth has to pay is half the value of the difference between them. So this is a weird way the pasuk says it, and we'll learn this pasuk exactly how we do this later. It's not the subject of today, but basically it says, and this is what we're going to darshan, it says, number 1, you split the value of this animal, which means this animal who did keren damages and not an animal that did any other kind of damages. That's the first drasha. The last part of it, gamat hamet yachatzun, we're going to say that word yachatzun is not necessary, because if you wanted to say you split the value of this one and you split the value of that one, which again, if you didn't understand that, don't worry, we'll get to it a different time. But the point is that what it simply means is you pay, it's a very convoluted way of saying you split the difference between the value of Naomi's animal when it was alive and the value of it now, which when it's dead, it is worth something. And that's what you end up having to pay, half that difference, half that amount. But the point is you could have said, and the dead nevela, period. You would know you split in half because that was the whole thing. You split it in half and that one also. So you wouldn't need the word yachatzun, which in a minute we're going to darshan as well. So basically we now say, not even half damages, because we can learn both those things from the pasuk that there is only in someone else's. In the Rishut Rabim, you're not liable full damages, and you're not liable half damages, because half damages is a unique halacha for keren, not for shen and regel. Second, kavachomer suggestion. Maybe shen and regel are only liable half damages in a private domain. How would you get that? Kavachomer mi keren. Again, the same kind of idea. Keren is obviously stricter because in the public domain, you're liable for it. And yet, even though it's so strict, but if it does damages in someone else's territory, you're only going to have to pay half damages. So shen regel, so shen regel that are going to be exempt in the public domain. Wouldn't it be obvious then that in someone's private domain, they would only be liable half damages? Because if they're not liable in the public and keren is liable in the public and keren is only liable half damages in private, then wouldn't you think shen regel is only liable half damages? Amar krat yishalem. Well, that pasuk about Rabbi Tarfon says yishalem, right? Metav sadeh metav kamo yishalem. Shalem comes from the root of, right? It's to pay, but it also comes from shalem, whole, complete. You have to pay a complete payment. Tashlumim ma'alya, right? Full payment. Okay, third suggestion. Maybe keren isn't liable at all in the public domain. And now we're going to do the flip of the kavachomer we just did, right? The two that we just did, really, or some form of them. If shen and regel in a private domain have to, right, in the domain of the one who was damaged, have to pay full damages, and yet but they're exempt in the public domain. So keren shebereshut and nizak is only chatzi nezek, right? If keren in the private domain is only half damages, eino din shebereshut arabim p'tura. So if it's more lenient than shen v'regel in the private domain, then it should be more, right? Then it should be, if they don't even have to pay anything in the public domain, then why should keren have to pay anything in the public domain? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Ka yechetzun. Okay, what do we learn from this word yechetzun? Now, it's a little weird how they get from this word to that, but the point is, I already showed you, yechetzun in that pasuk is unnecessary, because you just could have said, and also the dead one, and you wouldn't need to say, you split in half. So what did they learn from yechetzun? It could be because there's two mentions of chetzi here in the pasuk, they're learning it, that chetzi is both in private, both in public, there's no distinction. Fourth suggestion. Maybe a person should be liable to pay a ransom payment. What is a ransom payment? Remember, a shore kills a person. The owner of the shore gets stoned. The owner should really die. And this, by the way, is in a shore mu'ad case. There's a debate whether it would be in a shore tam as well. But the pasuk in the Torah says shore mu'ad. It's clear. And then it says, the gamba alav yumat, the owner should die. However, they give the owner a way to get out of it. They say, if you want to pay, which we'll get to what that means exactly, but whatever amount they put upon you, if you pay it, you can ransom your way out of death. So now they say, maybe a person who kills another person also is liable to pay kofar. The shore kills a person, you pay a ransom payment, maybe a person also, right? Like if someone murders someone, right? There's often payment that you pay in the legal case, right? In the courts of law nowadays, you pay compensation to the family for having killed their relative. So maybe there's also a ransom payment for humans who kill humans. And here comes the kavachomer. We're now going to compare a shore who injures a person to a shore who kills a person. If a shore injures a person, they only pay damages. They don't pay the 5 things, which we're going to talk about a lot today. Nezek, tzal, shevet, ripoy, and boshet. Those are the 5 payments that you have to pay to a person who gets injured, right? The damage you caused to them, the pain you caused to them, the shevet, the amount they couldn't go work, their loss of wages, the doctor's bills, ripoy, and the boshet, and the humiliation. But that's only if a person injures another person. If a shore does it, no. So if a shore is not liable for the 4 things, that's the extra 4 above nezek, and yet chayav b'kofel, and yet he has to pay the ransom payment, right? The owner has to pay the ransom payment. Adam shechayav b'arba dvarim einu din shechayav b'kofel. So if a person injures another person, he has to pay the 4 things. That means he's more strict than the shore, and therefore, when he kills a person, all the more so, he should have to also pay a ransom payment. To which they say, Amar Kra kachol asher yushat alav. When it talks about the ransom payment, it says whatever is placed upon him. Him means specifically him, meaning only the owner of the shore and not somebody else. So now, alav velo aladam. Okay, so there it says alav and not for a person. Only the owner of an ox who killed a person, but not the person themselves. Now we're going to flip that kal v'chomer and suggest that maybe the shore who injures a person should be chayav in arba advarim, because if he's chayav in kofer, maybe he should be chayav in arba advarim. So let's finish that kal v'chomer, and with that we're done. This list of kal v'chomers. Uma adam she'eno chayav b'kofer chayav. V'hei shor chayav b'arba advarim mikal v'chomer. So the shore should be liable for the four, right? Well, all five things really, from a kal v'chomer. Uma adam she'eno chayav b'kofer chayav b'arba advarim. If a person who doesn't have to pay the ransom payment and yet has to pay the four things. So shore shechayav b'kofer ein odin shechayav b'arba advarim. So if the shore is liable to pay the ransom payment, why wouldn't the shore also have to pay the four things? Again, the four things mean the 4 out of 5. There's nezek, tzal, shevet, ripo, and boshet. When they talk about it as 4, is because the fifth or the first one is nezek, which everyone has to pay. So we're only talking about the 4 other things. Amar kra ish ba'amito v'lo shor ba'amito. Okay, that's the pasuk that talks about the damage. The damages ish ki yitem mum ba'amito. It's a pasuk in Vayikra Kaf Daled Yutet. It's actually a strange context, so we're going to quote some other pasukim from there later today, which talk about after there was the person who cursed someone in the desert, and then he got punished. Right, he gets stoned. Then it has a whole slew of things about people who curse God because he used God's name. Right, that's what he did. He cursed in God's name. And then it talks about someone who hits a fellow man, someone who kills a fellow man. Okay, it talks about a whole list of behaviors, right? Which doesn't really, obviously belongs there. It's there for a reason, but it's a bit of a strange context there. But anyway, it says there, if you injure someone, like you did to him, that will be done to you, right? That's where it talks about eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It actually comes up in 2 contexts, and we'll talk about this later today as well. Comes up in Shmod and in Parshat Mishpatim, and it comes up here, okay, where it also has a bit of a shorter list of, right, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Then from there, they also derive the 5 things that you have to pay, and therefore, right, both from there and the other psukim. Anyway, that we'll get to later when we get to Perek HaChovel in our Masechet. But anyway, ish ba'amito v'lo shor ba'amito. That's only a person and not a shore. So again, we have a drasha in the pasuk that says no. Now we're going to ask a question. And with this, we're going to finish our sugya and then start with Adamu ad olam. This is a bit of a complicated section. Regel shedarsal gabei tinok b'chatzer nizak ma'u shetishalem kofer. Kofer payment in the Torah is for a shore that gores another, right, a person and kills them. But now they suggest, what if a shore was trampling, right, was walking in someone else's yard and trampled on a baby? Why a baby or a child? Because if it trampled on a big person, probably they wouldn't die. But a small person could die from an animal trampling. Obviously, it depends. Elephant, depends on the size of the animal. But basically, we're talking about if the animal was doing it not because they gored, okay, but because they were just walking, regel, and they trampled. Since kofer in the Torah comes up specifically by keren, the question is why. So here we're going to have 2 sides. So ma'u shetishalem kofer, does the owner need to pay the ransom payment for that child that was killed? Maybe we say it's just like keren, and this is like keren. In what sense is it like keren? Well, if you remember, the whole law of kofer comes up by a shor mu'at. A shor mu'at is a shore that already gored 2 or 3 times. That's what we're going to say right now. Keren, Kevin David Trey Utlatezin, here they make a reference to the fact that there's this machloket, whether it's 2 or 3. But since it already did it 2 or 3 times, it's therefore orchehu, it's expected behavior. Now, mishalem kofer, what's the deal? We assume the animal might gore, and therefore, when the animal does it, you're liable to pay the ransom payment because you really should have watched your shore. Hachanami loshna. Same thing with regel, because regel is expected behavior. And if you had a kid in the garden, it could be the animal was going to trample, you're responsible. Okay, right? If someone had the animal or the kid, it wasn't your kid, right? And then your animal trampled, you're responsible. Oh, Dilma. Or you say, no, it's only really like keren. Now, what's the difference between keren and regel? Big difference. Keren kavanato la'azik, hayein kavanato la'azik. Keren is an act of a violent act. Walking is not a violent act. It could be, there might be violent, terrible ramifications. You could, the animal could trample a child and kill it, but it wasn't with any intent to damage. And maybe when the keren, right, when the animal gores, the reason you're chayav the ransom payment is because it was an act with intent. Now, again, maybe the animal wasn't intending to kill, but the animal was intending to damage for sure. So that's a big question. So is there kofar by regel? That part's not so complicated. The part that's going to be complicated is how they get to this proof. You'll see from here till the end of the section till the Mishna is the proof. It's a little bit complicated. There's actually a proof and then a support for the proof. It's a little bit long-winded. So Tashma, what they're going to do is they're going to answer, but they're only going to answer according to Rabbi Tarfon. They're going to say, according to Rabbi Tarfon, we're going to see there is kofar by regel. Okay, but how they get there is a little bit long. We now have a source that is just Rabbi Tarfon's opinion. So Naomi brings her ox into, Ruth brings her ox into Naomi's domain without permission. Okay, Naomi didn't allow her in, but she went anyway. Okay, the shore went anyway. The shore kills Naomi, and then Naomi dies. Right, gores Naomi, and Naomi dies. Hashor biskila. Okay, the shore gets stoned. Uba'alav. Now here comes a big jump. We said that the ransom is shor mu'ad. Comes the Rabbi Tarfon and says, Bein tam, bein mu'ad, mishalem, kofar shalem. Whether it's tam, whether it's mu'ad, you pay full damages, full ransom. Okay? Divrei Rabbi Tarfon. So now, the Gemara says, where does he get this idea of kofar for a tam and that it's full damages? Kofar shalem betam le Rabbi Tarfon minale. Where could he possibly get it from? So they say, Lav mishum desavar leka Rabbi Yossi Aglili. So first of all, you'd have to say he holds like Rabbi Yossi Aglili, who has this opinion. Damar tam shalem chatzi kofar b'reshut harabi. Rabbi Yossi Aglili. Okay, there's a debate. I told you, kofar is only by a shor muad, but there's a debate. Do you pay chatzi kofar in the public domain? So Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, if it's a short time, yes, you pay chatzi kofar. Okay, just like there's chatzi nezek, there's chatzi kofar. So now you pay chatzi kofar in the public domain. And then once you establish that, my tela, and the key part of this whole thing is missing from the Gemara. I'm going to have to tell it to you outside, and it's also in the study guide. You can look there. My tela mikama chomer regel. You can get to this from a kavachomer from regel. Okay, how so? Here's the kavachomer. Ma regel b'reshut harabim patur. If regel is exempt in the public domain, okay, this is going to sound like the ones we started with. And yet, okay, now, exempt from what? So now we're going to fill in. We're going to assume it means exempt from kofar, from the ransom payment. And yet, b'reshut anizak mishalem. And yet, regel has to be paid. The kofar, again, we're assuming that we're talking about kofar here. It all depends what you fill in the blanks. But the basic kavachomer is regel and reshut harabim in the public domain is exempt. But in the private domain, it's full, right? And then, therefore, keren, which is half kofar in the public domain, all the more so should be liable full damages in the private, full kofar in the private domain. And that's how Rabbi Tarfon gets his kavachomer. Now, in order for that kavachomer to work, the most natural would be, what is the regel liable for in reshut harabim, in private domain and not in the public domain? Kofar, because we're learning kofar from kofar. Okay, so that's what they assume right now. So if you say this kavachomer is based on there's kofar payment for regel in the public domain, in the private domain, and that's how we get to full kofar in the private domain for keren, then you see that there's kofar b'regel. Okay, so therefore they say here, alma ika kofar b'regel, because if you're making a kavachomer argument from regel to keren, it must be that kofar exists by regel. To which the Gemara Rav Shimi says, I'm Rav Shimi min hardea. Tana min azikin de regel ma'itala. Why are you assuming fill in the blank kofar? Put regel of damages for regel. It could just be damages, regular damages. Your liable damages for regel, not in private, yes in public. I'm sorry, not in public, yes in private. And therefore, kofar, which you have in public, half kofar, again, that's all Rabbi Yossi Aglili, you would then have full kofar in the private. And maybe you're learning from nezek to kofar, to which the Gemara is going to have several problems with saying this, which is going to put them back to saying the only way this kavachomer could work is if the subject of regel was kofar, and prove that there is kofar b'regel. But it's going to take us a few back and forth to get to this. They're going to say, if you use damages of regel and not kofar, you can knock out the kavachomer. because damages, what we want to say in a kal vachomer is, right, that regel kofar is more lenient because it doesn't exist in Reshut HaRabim, in public, and therefore we can learn from there to kofar of keren, which is more strict because it does exist in Reshut HaRabim, and therefore will be strict in the public domain. But in order to say that, regel has to be more lenient. Now, if you fill in nezek and not kofar, then it doesn't really work, because you could say malin is a king de regel shken yeshna be'esh. Nezek of regel is more strict than kofar, because then we're comparing damages of regel to kofar of keren. Now, kofar of keren is less wide-reaching. Why? Because kofar does not exist for sure. Okay, there's a question: does it exist in regel? Okay, it definitely exists in keren, but it definitely doesn't exist in Aish, fire. There's no ransom payment if your fire kills a person. And if the boar kills a person, there's also no ransom payment. So we're going to say now that damages are less, right, are more strict because they apply in more places. And therefore you can't use it as the lenient part of this kal vachomer. That's the basic gist of this whole next part. So first they're going to say, so there's a kin of regel are more strict and therefore can't be the kal part. And you can't learn from there to keren, to kofar by keren, because yeshna be'esh, because they exist in fire, whereas kofar doesn't. Well, you can learn it from Talmud. You can learn it from damages of regel that are hidden, because hidden damages don't exist in Aish, and then it's the same as kofar. Right? Then they say, what do you mean? But it does apply in bor, and bor has no kofar. So again, damages of even Talmud are going to be more strict. So you can't learn from there to keren. Kalim, what about kalim? What about kalim that are, right? Kalim that are damaged. Well, kalim that are damaged by regel are, right, they don't exist by bor. So there you have it. You could use that because they don't exist in bor, and therefore they're not any stricter than the kofar. And then you could do the kal vachomer. But they say, well, what do you mean? But they do exist in fire. So now they come up with a combo. Mikelim tmunim. If you have kelim tmunim, hidden vessels, then basically there's going to be, right, they're going to exist. They're not going to exist by bor. They're not going to exist by Aish, and then you could do a kal vachomer. But because they exist in the same places where there's ransom by shore. But then the Gemara has a good answer. What do you mean? If a person damages hidden vessels, they're liable. And a person doesn't have a ransom payment. So again, you see that it can't be nezek, because if it's nezek, there's stringency about damages, even if you have to limit it to this only one case. All kinds of nizakin exist in places where there is no kofar payment. So therefore, your kal vachomer doesn't stand if you use nezek of regel to learn it, and therefore elalav shmaminami kofar de regel ma'itila. The only way to understand this is that it's all learned from kofar of regel. And therefore, alma ika kofar beregel. Therefore, you see, shmamina, you can learn from here that Rabbi Tarfon has kofar by regel. Okay, again, maybe not the rabbis, but the fact that Rabbi Tarfon suggests this kal vachomer, the only way that kal vachomer could work is if the kal vachomer is learned from kofar of regel and not nezek of regel. And now the Gemara is going to further prove it. Hachinami mistaber, if you didn't trust that proof enough. De'ika kofar beregel. Why? If you want to suggest what Rav Shimi suggested, then maybe it's all learned out from damages of regel. It doesn't prove anything about kofar and regel. Lifroch, it has a much better, easier way to knock out this whole kal vachomer. Malin is a kin de regel, sheken yeshna beregel. Okay, what does that mean? It sounds a little convoluted. But Rashi says, Tomar bekofar she'eno beregel. Nezek of regel is obviously more strict because there is no kofar by regel. If kofar didn't exist by regel, then you could say the whole concept of nezek is more strict because it is more far-reaching. It exists in regel, and kofar doesn't exist in regel. That already makes nezek more stringent, which means you can't put it as the kal part in the kal vachomer and learn from there to keren. So therefore, elalav shmamina, mi kofar de regel ma'itila, al ma'ika kofar beregel shmamina. So therefore, two ways of learning it from this kal vachomer of Rabbi Tarfon. At least according to Rabbi Tarfon, it seems there is a concept of kofar by regel. That's it. Okay, next. Now we're going to start with our Mishna, very famous Mishna, Adam Mu'ad La'olam. Adam Mu'ad La'olam, Ben Shogeg, Ben Mezi, Ben Er, Ben Yashin. Okay, I'll already, before I even explain, this Mishna seems to be, our version of the Mishna seems to be missing words. The Mishna is quoted in Sanhedrin with two more words that you're going to see that appear in the Gemara as well. Ben Ba'ones, Ben Ba'atzam. Okay, so let's talk about shogeg, mezid, ones, ratzon, and then we'll get to the yashin. This means a person is always mu'ad. They use the term of the shore, mu'ad, is always forewarned, meaning you're responsible for your actions no matter what, whether you did it intentionally or whether it was unwittingly. You didn't know it was forbidden. You didn't know you're not supposed to do it. You can't use that as an excuse. This is the classic, right? No excuses at all. Bein ba'ones, bein b'ratzon. Okay, ratzon and mezid are pretty similar. They mean you have intent. But the ratzon that goes opposite of ones is that you did it with your own volition, or ones is you were forced to do it, or could be more likely it was so beyond, you never intended at all. It was so beyond, how do you say it? It was so unexpected that the damages were caused from what you did. Like it was totally not something that you could have fathomed was actually going to happen. You're still liable. This is going to be a huge discussion later on. It's really a discussion that is underlying all the sugya when we're going to see actual cases. That where do we draw the line? Are you really not liable? Are you really liable for every single onus? There's this concept, onus rahmana patre, that the Torah actually the Torah exempted people from onus. So is there some sort of line drawn between onus, and that maybe there is some area that we will exempt you? Some of the commentaries say, no. We take this all the way. You are never, ever exempt from even onus, the most extreme onus. And because the Gemara always uses in the Mishna, uses cases, it's always going to be to figure out what exactly is the case, how onus is it, are you liable, are you not liable? And let's use that as an example in our next line. Bein bein yashin, whether you're sleeping or whether you're awake or sleeping. Obviously, the awake part, it's obvious, but the sleep part is the chidush. Even if you're sleeping, you're liable for damages. Now, the Yerushalmi says, Tosfot quotes it if you want to read it on Taf Kaf Zayin Amud Bet, the Tosfot Shmuel Amar B'Achila Shanu, he says, even though we say ones meratzon, he says ones gamur lo Rabbi Rachman, and he proves it from the Yerushalmi on this line. Okay, he says actually real ones you're actually exempt from. Why? In the Yerushalmi it says if you sleep, you go to sleep in a bed, and no one is in the bed with you, and someone comes into the bed in the middle of the night, you didn't know they were coming into the bed, and you damage them, you're exempt. So he says, what more onus is it than that? You had no idea, you were sleeping. How can you be responsible for your actions? So in that case, Tosfot says, based on the Yerushalmi, real onus, you're not liable. However, some people say no. It's not that real onus, you're not liable. It's that the person who came in second, they're more responsible than you. And this is something I keep talking about in the Masechet. We might say that you're fully responsible, okay, but you're going to see that the Gemara is going to bring case after case after case that you're not responsible. Even though they make this blanket statement, you're fully responsible. Okay, I'll already tell you, the next Mishna brings a case where you're not responsible. So there's something not clear here. So the question is, it could be that you're not responsible because it could be there's someone more responsible than you. So the case of the sleeping that the Yerushalmi brings could be understood in two ways. Either there was no way you were going to know you were asleep. How are you supposed to know that somebody showed up there and then you pushed them out of the bed and broke their arm? Or we say, no, it's just that person, it was their fault for coming into the bed. So when we say Adam Muad La'olam, one person in an interaction between two, one person is going to be held responsible. In this case, we're going to hold the second person responsible for doing something irresponsible by coming into bed without letting you know. So that's like a good example of a case that could go both ways and could teach you that onus, you really are exempt in real onus, or maybe not. Okay, this is a topic we're going to see over and over. Simed en chavero, here's two examples of shogeg, okay, and a ramification of it. Simed en chavero, if you accidentally blind your friend, or shiberet hakelim, these are two very different examples, or you broke some vessels, right? One obviously much more serious than the other, and one having to do with body damage, one having to do with damage to an object. Mishalem nezek shalem, you pay full damages, okay? Meaning no exemptions, okay? It's not like shor tam, shor muad. You are always liable. Gemara starts off and says, let's darshan this last line in the Mishna. Katani simet en chavero dumia deshiberet hakelim. The fact that we have these two things juxtaposed means there must be some similarity between them. Now, if you damage a person, usually you're liable for 5 things. Nezek, tzal, shevet, ripoy, and boshet. Comes the Gemara and says, well, if you did it bishkaga, though, unwittingly, Just like shiberet hakelim, you're not going to be liable for the pain caused to the kli. There is no such thing. There was no humiliation caused to the vessel. So therefore, if you blind someone unintentionally, even though, and again, this is an immediate limitation. Yes, adamu olam, but you damage a person unwittingly, you're not going to have the same laws as b'mezid. You're going to pay full damages, but nezek only, not the other four things on the list. Now the Gemara wants to know menane mile, and it's not asking menane mile to what we just said. It's asking menane mile. Rashi tells us that nezek chayav afilu b'shogeg. This seems to be saying, how do we know? We're now at the top of Amud Bet. How do we know that you're liable even unwittingly? Of course, we're going to get it from a pasuk in the Torah, and not because we should just make you reliable, right? It's all. This is where I said a long time ago that it's all about your actions, right? Your actions are the most important. It's all about actions, not about your thoughts and what you intended or anything else. So Amar Chizkiya v'chein Tana de Bechizkiya, Amar Kra. The pasuk says petza tacha patza. This is where it comes up the ayin tachat ayin, and it has a whole long list of this in place of that, this in place of that. Okay, an eye for an eye, a wound for a wound. So why did they add the words wound for a wound? And most of the commentaries say this whole concept appears twice in Shemot and also Vayikra. So why do you need to repeat it? Now, the words patza tacha petza only appear in Shemot, they don't appear in Vayikra. But still, why do you have to repeat this concept? It must be another, right? Each one we're going to darshan in a different place. Each one is coming to teach you something additional. So this one is coming to teach you that you're liable also for shogeg, for unwitting. Ve'ala ones keratzon. Here you see it, both the ones and ratzon and the shogeg and mezid. That should have been in the Mishna, but we don't see it in our text. But here it appears. So now they say, what do you mean? How can you learn it from there? We learned something else from these words. Something totally, and not totally unrelated, but having to do with damages of the nezek, tzal, shevet, ripoy, and boshet. This is coming to teach you that when there's nezek payment to be paid, you also have to pay tzal in addition to nezek. Now you might say, isn't that obvious? Well, that's what we learned. You have to pay the 5 things. Nezek, tzal, ripoy, shevet, and boshet. That obviously means you pay damages and you pay the pain caused to the person. So Rashi explains that you might have thought what? You might have thought that pain, like pain and suffering, however we evaluate that, might only be in a case where we didn't pay you damages. The damages kind of include the pain and the suffering, like, or maybe you're in place of. You might have thought. And then when would you pay tsar then? It would be a case where there is no damage. For example, Rashi says, what if I burn your fingernail? Your fingernail, there's no value to that, okay? It's not like I damaged your body. It just caused you pain and suffering. So maybe tsar is only to be paid in a case like that, and not bimkom nezek, when there's also damages, like I broke your finger. So petza tacha patza comes to teach you that there's tsar even when there's nezek. It's an additional thing to teach you. Both are separate. Okay, even when there is nezek, you also have to pay tsar. So which case you can't learn from that pasuk shogeg kemezid and ones keratzon. In Cain, the Gemara says no. You could have lichtov krap petza bipatza. You could have said wound in place of a wound, right? In other words, it didn't have to say tachat. That extra word, it could have just been said with a bet. And then you would have learned one thing. But my tachat patza, shma min atarte. The fact that it says a wound in place of a wound teaches you both things. Okay, that's our classic. You can learn 2 things because of the way it's worded. And now we get to these 4 cases. And these 4 cases are very famous sugya because it relates to many different issues. Our topic is shkaga, unwitting. Now, you might remember we've learned about shkaga and a bunch of other topics, and the Gemara is going to connect them all. Okay, number 1 that we haven't learned yet. Oh, the truth is we did learn it. All of them we learned. One is our topic, which is, again, if you do damage a person bishkaga, unwittingly, without intent, you don't have to pay the other 4 things. You only have to pay the damages. That we learned already from our Mishna, right? And from the Shiur, like Shiur Takeli. The second thing is Shabbat. When you do a melacha on Shabbat, it has to be what we call melechet machshevet. Like was done in the Mishkan, things were built with a lot of intent, and they were built the way they were designed. So if you do something the way you wanted to, it's a melacha. If you didn't intend to do it, then it's not a melacha. Because melechet machshevet asrat Torah, it has to be a creative act. If you didn't even want to create it, well, then you're not liable on a Torah level, like you don't bring a korban, let's say, or something, korban, for that, if that wasn't what you intended to do. Okay, you're not liable. Third thing, Ir miklat, going to a refuge city. When do you go to a refuge city? That is specifically shkaga, right? Now, if you veer to the right or to the left, meaning you're shogeg more like ones, karov la'ones, where it was so unexpected you were going to kill that person, then you don't have to go to the Ir miklat. You don't get the punishment of it. If it's karov lemezid, if you're almost like you intended to kill, you didn't, but you were really negligent, we don't even allow you to go to Ir miklat, because if you remember, Ir miklat is 2 elements. It protects, but it protects you from the relatives who want to kill you because you killed their relative accidentally. It also is a punishment, though. You're stuck. It's galut. It's called like exile. So because it has those 2 elements, if you're karov la'ones, you don't need to go. And if you're karov lemezid, you don't get to go. It doesn't help you. Okay, it won't protect you. And then the last issue is injuring your slave. If you injure your Canaanite slave, you break their arm, they go free. Okay, but we're going to see that perhaps they only go free if you intended to break their arm. So therefore, we're going to have 4 cases with a progression to them. You'll see, and we'll see what changes, and you can use the chart to help you see that. I'm a Raba. We're going to have a whole slew of comments of Raba, both today and tomorrow. You had a stone on your lap, and you didn't know it was there. You had no clue. For some reason, you just didn't notice it. Amad v'naflat, you get up and it falls. Now, 4 things are going to happen. 1, you damage someone with it. So now these are 4 potential things that could have happened. Linyan, it's like looking with different glasses on. If you damage someone, linyan nizikin chayav, linyan arba'at dvarim patur. And this is going to be for all 4 cases, because all 4 cases are going to be some form of shkaga. And if it's shkaga, you didn't intend it, no 4 things. You're only liable damages. Linyan Shabbat, melacha machshevet asrat Torah. This is not melacha machshevet. You didn't even intend to do a melacha. You didn't intend to do anything. This is not a creative act. Le'inyan galut patul. If it's galut to go to Ir miklat, you're exempt. Why are you exempt? Because if you killed someone by standing, oh, by the way, I didn't say. What happened in Masechet Shabbat in relating to Shabbat? Probably there's a machloket about this. One says that you injured someone and caused blood to come out, and that would be a melacha on Shabbat. But let's stick with what this seems to be the more simple reading is, as you got up, the rock moved from a private domain to a public domain, right? Or moved 4 cubits in the public domain, which would be liable. So you're not liable. If you killed a person by standing up and the rock killed somebody, you're exempt because you didn't even know the rock was there. You're so karov la'ones that for sure you don't have to go there. Linyan eved, if you broke your eved's arm, let's say, plukte derived Rabbanit. It's machloket Titania, and this we saw before. I think it was in Kiddushin, if I remember correctly. Yeah, Kiddushin daf kaf dalet. Arei shaya rabo rofe va'amar lo kol eni v'sima. The owner of the slave was a doctor, and the eved said, "Can you, fix my eye? I have an issue. Chator li shinai. Can you do some surgery on my tooth?" V'pila, and he knocked it out. Okay, or he blinded his eye. The fact that the master wasn't trying to do anything, right? Wasn't trying to hurt him, so it does, right? It doesn't matter. He goes free anyway because intent doesn't make a difference here. So if you hold by that, then the eved's going to go free. Also, if you knocked his eye out with the stone. Rashba gomer v'shichata ad shekaben l'shachata. The pasuk there says v'shichata. You need kavana. They say it would have to be. That's a destructive act. Destruction usually comes with intent. Has to be that you intended, and here you didn't intend. So no. So there's a machloket. There's actually a whole different way to understand this, and it has to do with how we understood the sugya there in Kiddushin, but I'm not going to get into that. This is some people say neither one thinks you'd be liable here, because in the case of the doctor, there was at least intent to touch the eye. Here you didn't have any intent at all. For sure, you'd be not liable. That's a whole different way of reading it. He kirba ushachacha. Case 2. You knew it was there, but you forgot, right? How often do we just forget something we knew a minute ago, right? And then you totally forget. And amav v'nafla. And again, you stood up and the same thing happens. Linyan izikin chayav linyan arba'at dvarim patur, same thing. You're shogeg. You didn't intend to damage. Linyan galut chayav. This is already different because it says there bishkaga, which means michlal dehava leyidia. Usually shkaga is I knew and then I forgot. Dehava leyidia, you did know and forgot. So you're actually going to go to Ir miklat. This is because remember, what is shkaga? You do go to Ir miklat if it's an accident. This was right? An accident that could have been avoided because you did know, you just forgot. Linyan Shabbat patul, because again, you didn't intend anything. Linyan Eved, same thing. Plukte derashbag v'Rabbanit. Nitkaven lizrok shtayim v'zarak arba. Period. Okay? Plukte derashbag v'Rabbanit. Now they say, Nitkaven lizrok shtayim v'zarak arba. what if you intended to 2 and it went 4? So you intended to throw something 2 cubits. Now, throwing something 2 cubits in Rishut Rabim is not a melacha on Shabbat. But in the end, you threw it 4, which is a melacha. So linyan is, and again, for all the other things, it's you did throw, but you didn't intend to throw it to where it actually damaged someone. So linyan is ikin chayav, linyan arba advarim patur, because you intended to throw it too. You didn't intend for it to hit the person that was standing 4 cubits away. You just have bad aim, right? You don't know how to throw. Linyan Shabbat melacha machshevet b'inan. If it was Shabbat, you still didn't intend even to do a melacha, so you're not liable. Linyan galut, this one's a little tricky. Asher lo tzada amar Rachmana, prat l'nizkaven l'zrach shtayim v'zarach arba. That you didn't intend, the Torah says, which comes to exclude someone, this exact case, okay? If you threw it, now, there's a big debate. Rashi brings 2 interpretations. Maybe this means you're actually, yes, chayav, because asher lo tzada is when you're mazid, when you're intentional. Here it was unintentional and you have to go to ir miklat. Some people say no. Asher lo tzada was you didn't intend at all. Here you did have some intent and you're actually karov lemezid. And therefore you can't go to ir miklat. You're not allowed. You're exempt, but exempt in a bad way, which is you don't get the atonement, you don't get the protection. I forgot to mention, it's not just protection, it's also atonement for the fact that you killed someone. If you want to learn more about ir miklat, we have a whole course on our site, 4 sessions on Masechet Makot and ir miklat, where we really delved into these issues. Le'inyan eved plugta derashbag v'Rabbanan. So again, in terms of eved, it's a machlok. Nitkaben lizrok arba v'zarach shmona. Last case here for this section, you intended to throw up 4 cubits. Now this is a little different only in terms of Shabbat, because you did intend to do a melacha. It's just the melacha didn't exactly come out the way you wanted. You intended it for it to go there, and it went farther. So le'inyan nizikin chayav, le'inyan arba advarim patur, same thing. You hit someone, okay, you weren't aiming for them, so no, you're not chayav the 4 things, but you obviously are chayav damages. Le'inyan Shabbat, it depends. If be'omel kol makom shetirtzeh tanuach, if you say, I don't really care where it's going to land, you will be responsible because you intended to do a melacha, and you actually did a melacha, and you didn't really care where it was going. But lo, this is fascinating. If you really didn't want it to go there, then you didn't do what you wanted it to do, even though you wanted to do a melacha. The fact that you did a melacha, but the results were different than what you thought, you're actually not liable. It's fascinating what to say about this. You could spend a good 2-3 shiurim just on this whole section. Linyan galut asher lo tzada, pratlin tkaben l'zrach arba v'zarach shmona. In terms of ir miklat, it doesn't matter 2 to 4, 4 to 8. It's all one and the same. So however we explained it last time, we would explain it here. And linyan eved plugta derashbag v'Rabbanan. Okay, now, I'm a rabbi. Another case. This we actually mentioned before. Remember, Raba had a question, do we go by the beginning or do we go by the end? And we said, well, to Raba, it was very clear, that's this case. Zarak kli merosh hagag. Okay, now Rashi says, the owner of the vessel threw their kli onto the floor, and someone else on the way down goes out the window, right, and takes a baseball bat, smashes it. Patur. So that person who smashed it is exempt. Why? My time of mana tavira tavar. He broke a broken kli. So that's Rashi. Rashi says the person who threw it is the owner, which sounds like if it wasn't the owner, then we would go batar ikara, right? We would go by whoever threw it. If you threw my vessel from the roof and someone else smashed it with a baseball bat, you would be responsible for throwing my vessel from the roof. The Rava says, no. No one's responsible. And this is fascinating because the one who threw it, it never fell. You could say, right, like the Heaven Can Wait movie, right, where he gets up to heaven, they took him before his time, right? He was about to get into a car accident, and the angel takes him up. He says, what do you mean? I didn't die, right? You don't know what would have happened. Maybe some miracle would have happened. Someone would have caught it on the way down. So the first person can't be held liable, and the person who hit it also can't be held liable because it was basically going to break anyway. So we play it kind of in 2 ways. That's the derived, which is very interesting. Rashi doesn't hold that way, but again, kind of fascinating. Last case for today, I'm a rabbi. This is also fascinating. I throw my vessel from the roof, but I throw someone else's vessel, from the roof, but there's pillows and blankets on the floor. So basically when I throw it, it's going to fall on the pillows and blankets. It won't break. But someone else comes and pulls those blankets away, and now it smashes to the floor. Or even, let's say I had a rope attached to the pillows and blankets. I throw the vessel and I pull the rope and the pillows and blankets disappear. And now the vessels break. I'm also patur. Okay. Fascinating. My timer. Well, first of all, the person who pulls the blankets out is grama. That's indirect damages. I didn't throw a kli, so it's not my fault. The one who threw it, it was like my arrows were never going to go anywhere because it wasn't going to break. Even though eventually it broke, that was something else. So again, we start to see all these cases where you're actually not liable. Even though we said you're constantly liable, in these cases, you need an action to actually be liable, and you're missing an action. So these are fascinating things to think about. We're going to stop here and start with the next section, tomorrow's daf. See you all tomorrow. And for those on Zoom, I will post on the WhatsApp group for the Zoom. I will likely not be teaching Thursday morning, but the shiur will go up as usual. It'll actually go up earlier in the morning if I am not able to teach live. I will update tomorrow definitively. Have a great day, everyone.